Hey everyone, welcome back to Chat Like a Native. Today we're diving into something I know a lot of you struggle with, especially at that intermediate level where you can chat a bit, but sometimes those conversations, well, they kind of hit a wall.
It can be super frustrating, right? You're feeling good, the words are coming, and then bam, awkward silence.
Exactly, and it can really knock your confidence. So today we're going to unpack those awkward silences, figure out why they happen, and most importantly, give you a bunch of tools to help you not just survive them, but actually use them to have even better conversations in English.
I love that, using those silences to your advantage. Because really, a little silence isn't always a bad thing, is it? It's just how we react to it that makes all the difference.
Okay, so first, why don't we acknowledge the elephant in the room? Why do these awkward silences happen so often, especially when we're speaking a language that's not our native tongue?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. For one, there's that mental juggling act we're doing, translating in our heads, searching for the right vocabulary, all while trying to follow the conversation.
And I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect, to speak fluently without any pauses, that when a silence does occur, we panic.
Absolutely. We forget that even in our native languages, conversations have natural pauses and moments of silence. It's part of the flow.
So how can we change our mindset and start to see these silences not as threats, but as opportunities?
One thing that can really help is to shift our focus from speaking to listening. When we actively listen to the other person, we're not just waiting for our turn to talk, we're engaging with their words, their ideas, and that gives us time to process and formulate our own responses.
So active listening buys us time and also helps us come up with more relevant things to say. I like that. But what about those times when we really do draw a blank? What are some practical strategies for restarting a conversation?
Well, one thing that's always helpful is to have a few go-to conversation starters in your back pocket, little prompts that can get the ball rolling again. These could be related to current events, something you read or watched recently, or even a simple question like, hey, what do you enjoy doing in your free time?
And it doesn't have to be anything super clever or witty, right? Just something to break the ice and invite the other person to share.
Exactly. The key is to ask open-ended questions that encourage them to elaborate, to give more than just a yes or no answer. So instead of asking, do you like to cook? You could say something like, what's your favorite thing to cook? Or, what got you interested in cooking in the first place?
I love those examples.
Yeah.
And by asking questions like that, we're also showing genuine interest in the other person, which helps build connection and make the conversation feel more natural.
Precisely. And sometimes the best way to restart a conversation is to simply acknowledge the silence. You could say something like, I'm just trying to think. Or give me a second, I'm trying to put my thoughts into words. It shows the other person you're still engaged and thinking, even if you haven't found the perfect phrase yet.
It takes the pressure off, right? It shows that a little silence is normal and nothing to be afraid of. Now, you mentioned earlier that silences can actually be opportunities. So how can we use them to our advantage?
Well, sometimes a pause can be a good time to observe the other person's body language, their facial expressions, and really tune into how they're feeling. Are they engaged? Are they bored? Are they confused? This can give you valuable information about how the conversation is going and whether you need to adjust your approach.
It's like taking a moment to read the room, right? And that can help us avoid those cringeworthy moments where we're rambling on and the other person is completely checked out.
Exactly. And sometimes a silence can be an invitation to share something more personal, to go a little deeper than just surface level chit chat. If you sense that the conversation is flowing well and there's a level of trust, you might take a pause and then share a personal anecdote or a story that connects to what you were talking about.
So instead of saying, I love to travel, you could say, one of my most memorable travel experiences was when and then share a brief anecdote that illustrates your point.
Yes, and by doing that, you're inviting the other person to reciprocate, to share their own experiences, and that can lead to a much more meaningful and engaging conversation.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about mindset and strategies, but what about the physical aspect of conversation? How can our body language help us navigate those awkward silences?
Nonverbal communication is so powerful. Things like making eye contact, nodding your head, and maintaining an open posture can all signal that you're engaged, even if you're not speaking. It shows that you're listening and interested in what the other person has to say.
And even a simple smile can go a long way in making you seem more approachable and putting the other person at ease.
Absolutely. A warm smile can instantly disarm a tense situation and make those silences feel less awkward. It's like saying, hey, I'm enjoying this conversation, even if we're taking a moment to think.
Now let's talk about the C word, confidence. How can we build the confidence we need to feel comfortable in those silences and really shine in our English conversations?
Practice, practice, practice. It's the key to mastering any skill, and speaking a new language is no different. The more you practice speaking English, the more fluent and confident you'll become. And it doesn't have to be anything formal or intimidating. Find a language partner, join a conversation group, or simply chat with English-speaking friends or colleagues whenever you get the chance.
And even if you don't have anyone to practice with, there are so many great resources online. Language learning apps, YouTube channels, podcasts like ours, there's something for everyone.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to experiment with different approaches and find what works best for you. Some people thrive in structured learning environments, while others prefer more informal, immersive experiences.
And I think it's important to remember that confidence is built gradually, step by step. Don't expect to become a fluent speaker overnight. Set realistic goals, celebrate your progress, and be kind to yourself along the way.
Couldn't agree more. Every conversation, every interaction is a learning opportunity. Embrace the challenges, learn from your mistakes, and most importantly, keep talking.
And for our listeners who are still struggling with those nerves and that fear of making mistakes, what advice would you give them?
I would say remember that everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers. It's part of the learning process. Focus on getting your message across, on connecting with the other person, and don't let the fear of imperfection hold you back.
And remember, the vast majority of people are kind and understanding, especially when they know you're learning a new language. They're more likely to admire your effort than judge your every mistake.
And if you do encounter someone who's less than supportive, well, their negativity says more about them than it does about you. Don't let it derail your progress.
That's such a great point. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive today, let's give our listeners some specific takeaways. What are 3 actionable things they can do to feel more comfortable in those conversational silences?
Okay, first, prepare a few go-to conversation starters. Think about some topics you're comfortable talking about and come up with a few open-ended questions that can help get the conversation flowing again.
Second, practice active listening. Really focus on what the other person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally. This will give you time to process and come up with thoughtful responses, and it will also help you build a stronger connection.
And third, remember that silences are normal. Don't be afraid to acknowledge them or even use them to your advantage. Take a moment to breathe, observe, and think before jumping in with your next thought.
And listeners, as you head into your next English conversation, I encourage you to pick one of these techniques and really focus on applying it. You might be surprised by how even a small shift in your approach can lead to a more relaxed and enjoyable experience.
And who knows, maybe that awkward silence will turn into a moment of genuine connection and shared understanding.
Thanks for joining us today on Chat Like a Native. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of English conversation.